very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for taking your afternoon to be here with us today for this special Research Edge session. My name is Vic Nair. I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies and Research at the University of the Bahamas. Just an introduction for those of you who are not familiar with Research Edge. Research Edge is a forum dedicated to the discussion of current and novel research conducted by University of the Bahamas, the faculty, the students, and community professionals, and the university's collaborators. Research Edge provided a dynamic environment for the scholarly exchange of ideas, debates, and discussions on relevant and recent issues that is facing not just the country but also the region. So it is an honor for me to have today's session in conjunction with the launch of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies Volume 26 as part of the second Research Edge session for this fall semester. So without further ado, allow me to hand over the session to the managing editor of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies, Dr. Raymond Onbring.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Nair. Thank you, Dr. Oriaki, for attending. Yes, it is my privilege to serve as the managing editor of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies, which is UB's academic journal. We have a very good issue this year. I'm very excited about it. It's also one of the largest we've ever had, so that's great. So despite the dual grave challenges of the 2019-2020 academic year, that is Hurricane Dorian and the still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, UB faculty are rising to the challenge, continue to build their research output. As always, this year's edition of the journal would not have been possible without the help of many individuals, including international and local peer reviewers, the copy editing team. I was able to recruit some new copy editors from English Studies this year, and they did a great job. And finally, Ms. Virginia Ballance, who is presenting today, nursing and health sciences librarian, who is also the former managing editor of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies. She's done a lot of work in the past month with getting us over the finish line, doing the metadata and catching all of those last minute tiny typos. So thank you very much to Ms. Ballance. She's done a great job. Yes, we are looking forward to an exciting and eventful 2021. So we are planning, in addition to the regular fall issue in 2021, we will be releasing a issue in the spring, co-edited, guest edited, by Drs. Saskia First, Dustin Halberg, and Ian Bethel-Bennett, all from English Studies. That issue is focusing exclusively on the effects and aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. So I look forward to working with them as that issue proceeds to publication in the spring. So I would like to right now invite Dr. Maria Oriaki to bring some words.
Thank you, Dr. Owenbring. On behalf of the Office of Academic Affairs, I'd like to thank you all for attending the launch of the 26th volume of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies. The IJBS is the University of the Bahamas' interdisciplinary, open access academic journal, now in its 22nd consecutive year of publication. As the name of the journal suggests, IJBS is both international and uniquely Bahamian in its focus. It was on October 20th, 2010, 10 years ago, that we launched the International Journal of Bahamian Studies, the new name of our online research journal. With a change in name, the journal became an open access one available online to anyone, anywhere, without financial or legal impediments. It is indexed by Google, Google Scholar, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and it is included in commercial databases such as EBSCO. IJBS allows us to promote Bahamian studies and to expand access to research about the Bahamas throughout the world. As a result, research published in the journal has the potential to have a significant impact, both here at UB and in the Bahamas, as well as overseas. A key activity of any institution of higher education is that of creating knowledge and adding to cultural experiences. The value of research and the creation of knowledge can never be overstated, and I am proud to report that this year's edition is one of the largest ever in the history of the journal, consisting of 11 articles, making the issue approximately twice as long as the typical issue. In addition to the high quality work from our UB scholars, we are pleased that this year's edition includes 3 articles from scholars beyond our shores, 2 of whom Dr. Javier Francisco-Ortega of Florida International University and Dr. Charmane M. of the University of Alabama at Birmingham are joining us today. As you would appreciate, a journal like this one is the result of many hours of commitment and work. For this, I would like to thank especially our managing editor, Dr. Raymond Owenbring, as well as Miss Virginia Ballance, past editor, who continues to provide invaluable support and advice. Thank you both for your service and your willingness to continue to serve in this way. Thank you as well to the many persons who submitted articles for publication, as well as the peer reviewers who ensure that our standards are maintained. IJBS is looking forward to an eventful 2021. In addition to the regular fall issue, the IJBS will be releasing a special issue in spring 2021. Focusing on interdisciplinary approaches to the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. As you can see, this journal continues to make a tangible contribution to scholars, which accords a voice with which to tell our story and contribute to Bahamian knowledge. Congratulations to all of the authors of the papers published today. Thank you once again for attending.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oriaki, for those words. Dr. Nair, I would like to share my screen right now. I just would like to show everyone how they can access the journal. So you go to the UB main page, ub.edu.bs. And they're over here on the research tab, and over here, International Journal of Bahamian Studies. And as you can see, our issue has been published. So all of the articles that we're talking about today are here, so you can read them in detail. Okay, so our first presenter today is Mr. William Fielding, and Director of the Office of Institutional Strengthening and Accreditation at the University of the Bahamas. I had told, as Mr. Saunders won't be here, we are down to 4 presenters. So I told the presenters that to go aim for about 10 minutes. I think you can maybe extend to 12, and then we'll have time for a few questions after each presentation. And then depending on how things are going, maybe we can have some more time for questions at the very end after everyone's presented. Okay, Mr. Fielding, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. I'll just share my screen if I may. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
I'm afraid I'm talking about a slightly, I suppose, depressing topic. We've got enough depression going on with COVID and everything else, so you'll have to forgive me. So maybe we could talk about non-bullying in the Bahamian workplace rather than bullying. But anyway, that's the title. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Right, thank you. So firstly, if we're talking about bullying, we need to have some idea as to what we are actually discussing. And the framework that we adopted for this was that bullying must have certain behaviors, or the behaviors have to be reoccurring, and they need to arise from a position of inequality between the victim and the bully. And so some of the times when we think we might be being bullied, it may not actually fit very well into this definition. The literature makes it very clear that there is no single definition of what workplace bullying looks like. But I think, but maybe from our own experiences, if we have been, or we feel we've been victims of bullying, we would have perhaps feel that they fit in with this. One of the reasons why we did this study was that Margot Blackwell, she was constantly encouraging me, I would hate to say bullying me, but constantly saying that we need to do a study on bullying in the workplace. And when we started to look at the literature on this, we couldn't find anything that related to the Bahamas. So although we had, I had come across comments that there had been studies looking at bullying in the Bahamian workplace, if they had been done, they hadn't been shared or published for some reason. So this was an attempt to start off a conversation to assess the amount of workplace bullying, if you like, where does it occur, and who is at risk of being bullied. So we're starting from a position of, if you like, considerable ignorance in terms of the research background that I'm aware of, and if someone can tell me of something that I've missed, of course, I would be grateful. And the other thing that we were particularly interested in is to try and find out who is at risk of being bullied. So is bullying in the workplace part of a continuum of people who have been subject to abuse of various forms in other aspects of their life? So are we talking about someone who's being bullied in the workplace who has also been a victim of violence or abuse in other areas of their life? And of course, what's the implication of being bullied? Does it really matter? It may sound a simple question to ask, but we thought that that would be useful for us to know in this particular jurisdiction, community that we're looking at. So what we did was we used a standard scale, the negative acts questionnaire. Negative acts sounds somewhat more benign than bullying, but that's essentially what it is. And this is a standard scale that's been used in many communities around the world. And it's there are 22 items in this scale, which look at 3 dimensions of bullying in the workplace. You've got workplace bullying, personal bullying, and the physical intimidation that might take place. In addition, we also asked a more general question of respondents as to whether they thought that they had been bullied at work. So as you can imagine, there was a very strong association, a correlation between the findings that we got from these 2 different approaches. But we wanted to use the standard questionnaire because that would then give us some measure of bullying, which we could perhaps then compare with similar studies from elsewhere, so that we had a frame of reference in order to assess the results that we obtained. We used an internet study. So the method that we use is that I teach a research methods class, and my students are they're given set number of people whom they need to engage in the sample. And so this enables us to get quite a large number of people participating in the study. So they will use, they will send the SurveyMonkey link to their friends and relations and ask them to not only fill it out, but also send that linkage to their friends and their relations. So it is a snowball sample, so it is subject to bias. But what we're looking to, obviously, are linkages within the sample. And when it comes to people who are working, we obviously needed to have a definition of those who were working. And our definition was those who were working for money. So if you worked and you got payment in kind, then you weren't part of our target population. So a housewife, yes, they work, but not for money. So they would be excluded from this particular study. So that was how we defined our target population. And as you can see, we got a reasonably large number of respondents in the survey who completed most of the questions. So what I would like to do is to ask Dr. Vic, we'll have a little bit of fun now. I'd like to ask Dr. Vic to put up this poll and ask you in the audience, whether you feel that you have been bullied at work. There we are. Okay, so we've got 50% of the people, 50% of you who we've only got 6 people who have voted, but anyway.
Hey, your sample size is too small there.
I know. Well, I can't help that. I mean, that's people who have.
Can we get all to vote? We have about 45 participants in this.
Somehow you got the vote. It has been closed, Dr. Vic. I don't know quite why it says it's closed.
Okay, let me relaunch it.
All right, that's better. Anybody else wish to?
We have 86%.
All right, so most
voted.
people have voted. So we've got about 48% of you. So we've got about half of the people, half of you saying that you have not been bullied at work. So the other half are saying that you're either not sure or you were bullied at work. All right, so that's quite fun. Thank you, Dr. Vic, for that. We can end that now. Thank you. So what was it that we found out from our survey? So what we found was something remarkably similar. We've got about half the people who were not bullied, which is just what we found a few minutes ago in this very room, in inverted commas. And what is also interesting is that we've got roughly similar percentages of males and females who reported being bullied. And by bullying, this is the more, if you like, the more severe bullying as defined by this scale. And so if we're going to concentrate on the positive aspects this afternoon, we're going to say that about half the people in the population were not, in the working population, were not subject to bullying. So we want to hang on to that positive piece of news, but on the other hand, we've got 50% of the people who say they were subject to bullying. We wanted to get a rough idea as to where people, was the bullying evenly distributed across different areas of work. Clearly, with only 2,000 or so people, we weren't able to get a particularly large number of people in any one area of work. But so we themed these areas of work into tourism, hospitality, law enforcement, and so on. And you can see that in the areas of hospitality and law enforcement, they apparently have the largest percentage of people who reported having been bullied. And I think that what is important for us, of course, is that the Bahamas is very much an economy which is, or at least used to be, directed towards tourism and hospitality. And so for that to be the sector where apparently the highest level of, or the higher levels of bullying are occurring might be deemed as a cause for concern. And so that obviously warrants more investigation as to why a very important industry. And of course, the third one down on the list is finance, which is another pillar of our economy. So again, why is it these two pillars of our economy, why are they showing up as being areas that might be causes for concern when it comes to bullying? The other thing that we wanted to look at was what might be going on in terms of the position. Does your position in the workplace protect you from being a bully? From being bullied? And you can see that in the case of the males, it does protect you. But in the case of the females, there's less protection. The higher the female goes up the ladder, it does result to some degree to a lesser occurrence of bullying, but it's clearly not as marked as it is with the male. So there are clearly different mechanisms apparently taking place within the workplace when it comes to the position of the person and whether they are a subject of bullying or not. We were also interested in the linkages between experiences of bullying in the workplace and other experiences. And you can see here that there's now a marked difference between what happens between the males and the females. So the violence in the home that the male is experienced to by having a mother who was hit by the intimate partner doesn't seem to have any effect as to whether the male is bullied, but it has a large effect as to whether the female was bullied. And again, we can see bullying at school is an indicator that person is more likely to become bullied at work. And so we can start to see that some of these people who are bullied at work have indeed almost lived a lifetime where they have been at risk or have been bullied. So these, in a sense, are people who have suffered perhaps a number of misfortunes during their life so far. The consequences of this are fairly obvious. We probably don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that. But if you are bullied, then you're going to want to move on. You're not going to feel happy with the job. And of course, again, when we think of the economy of the Bahamas being a tourism, a customer service based economy, clearly, if we've got people who aren't feeling happy with their job, they're not going to be giving such good customer service as people who are feeling happy with their jobs. And if you're thinking of leaving that particular workplace, again, you're not going to be offering the same level of service that we might like. So where does this leave us? So what? Clearly, I think we can agree that we need to investigate bullying in more detail in the sector by sector. We obviously want to know who are the bullies. We didn't actually address this in the survey, but it does seem to suggest that there's a need for training in the workplace, particularly the supervisors. And of course, there's going to be a need for counseling for those people who do suffer from bullying. And of course, the bullies themselves will need to be counseled. So this is just a first attempt to try and get a conversation going on this topic and to see some of the ramifications that some of the people who are bullied in the workplace do indeed seem to be those people who have been victims of other forms of abuse in other areas of their life. So thank you very much indeed. And on behalf of you who are not bullied, enjoy your next day of work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fielding. We have time for just a few questions from Mr. Fielding before we move on. I believe Wendy Poitier asked a question in the chat. Is there any indication of the characteristics of those who are not bullied?
Well, I mean, they're the people who are not bullied. They're the people who will also have been less likely to have been victims of violence outside of the home. If you've got education is to some extent is a protector to some extent for I think it's more for the for the males than it is for the females. We did look at education to see if education would protect you from bullying. So there are some indicators there as well. But really, it's almost the reverse of what we were talking about just now. But again, we've got about half the people who are bullied. And what's interesting, when we look at that figure, about 22% of the people who were bullied according to the scale, that 22% is internationally is a slightly higher figure than you would have seen in other countries, where the figure is maybe 15 or to 17% of the population falling into that bullied category. So again, that might be an area of concern, but we need to be careful that the sample that we have is subject to bias. So we need to be cautious when we extrapolate that figure out into the wider population.
Okay, are there any other questions from Mr. Fielding? Okay, hearing no other questions, let us move on to the next paper, which will be presented by Doctors Francisco-Ortega and Chavarria of Florida International University and Dr. Ethan Freid of the Bahamas National Trust.
Thank you. So I can share screen now, okay, Raymond?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. First, my name is Javier Francisco-Ortega. I'm the last author of this contribution. Just a couple of things. Once I finish my talk, then or my more presentation, then Raquel will need to be able to share screen and to give the presentation. So this was a collaboration we had between my university, Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden located in Miami, and the Bahamas National Trust. I have to start saying that the Bahamas National Trust and us have had a collaboration for many, many, many years, I think at least 25 years or more. And this is a study focusing mostly on botanical history. And this is an area in which my lab and other colleagues from the Caribbean islands have actively engaged in the last maybe 10 years, trying to understand the history of plant exploration in these islands, particularly when we look into the developing of new crops in the United States. So the way we're going to do that is Raquel Chavarria, who was an undergrad student in FIU under my supervision, she will deliver the talk. She did most of the work concerning putting all together. Then once she finished, Ethan will say some words, I suppose mostly about the commitment of the Bahamas National Trust for this kind of studies. And then after that, we can open the floor for questions. So having said that, I would like now to introduce Raquel. She graduated last summer. She's right now getting ready to hopefully join the medical school. And it's nice to see a student who is has a broad view, although she wants to be a doctor, that she has an interest in some studies like this, which somehow bridge humanities, biology, plant exploration. So having said that, and now we have only 10 minutes. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I will let Raquel to somehow give an introduction to the talk. And now we have only 10 minutes, so we're going to deliver really a very short introduction. Now next I have to stop sharing, no?
She should be able to share a screen.
Okay, so that's it. Okay, let me, okay, now that's it. Now you can share the screen, Raquel, I also stop sharing.
Let me go ahead and bring this up. Okay, I hope you guys can see that okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is a little bit of a switch from bullying to plants, but like Dr. Ortega mentioned to you guys, this is about the first expedition of the USDA to the Bahamas, headed by Fairchild. So let's go ahead. So the USDA sponsored a number of expeditions to different locations. But David Fairchild headed all of them, and this is why the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden here in Florida regards Fairchild as one of the more important plant explorers of the US specifically. So there were 10 expeditions in total. All of them took place on board the Utowana, which is a research yacht you can see here on screen. And then the entire overview or the itinerary of the entire expedition is here on the right. So you can see that the Utowana went all the way down to Guyana and then back to Florida. So the way that our team was able to recreate the itinerary that the Utowana took to the Bahamas is from 3 major sources. So we looked at the travelogue from the US National Archives. In the middle, you can see we also looked at collection books by Fairchild, which was in the Fairchild archives themselves. Volunteers helped us scan and transcribe these. And also herbarium specimens from the US National Herbarium. So all of these we were able to correspond to be able to form the itinerary. These were our 4 expedition biologists. You can see 3 of them were from the USDA, and Toy on the far right, he came from UF. So this was very much a collaborative effort between the biologists. On the far left, you see David Fairchild himself. Next is Loomis. He was an entomologist from the USDA, Dorset, and Toy, who was also an agronomist. So here's the actual itinerary that we recreated. You can see on the left, you can see the Utowana started from Miami, Florida, and hit 7 different islands going all the way down to Inagua. On their return, they only went to 1 island and then returned back to Miami. On the right, you can see we enumerated the number of photos as well as herbarium specimens and plant accessions that were collected at each of the 7 islands, New Providence, Eleuthera, Cat Island, and all of these that were visited. So the actual goal of the expedition was initially to find a specific species of cotton that was rumored to grow on the Bahamas. But instead they were able to describe a new species of palm that's endemic only to the Bahamas. So it could only be found there. And this is Cocothrinax inaguensis. You can see on the left, this is a photo taken by one of the biologists on the actual expedition. And here on the right is a photo by Brett Jestrow from the Fairchild Garden. And this is the actual species growing still today on the islands in the Bahamas. So the exciting thing about our article is that all the sources that we used to recreate the itinerary are available as links that you can access online in the actual article. And so I'm not going to show you all of them, but really briefly, if I'm allowed to, I want to share the travelogue and how it looks like on the archives. So if you give me one moment, I hope you can see that. So this is on archive.org. You can see here is the very first page of the travelogue. This only covers the Bahamas portion of the expedition. Like I said, there were many others. But you can see here are all the diary entries, number of photos, and different references from the islands that they took. So if that's of interest, please go check that out. And the very last thing is, here we go. So here are our volunteers. These were from the archives at Fairchild Tropical Garden, as well as Dr. Ortega. So they helped get the collection books that Fairchild wrote on his expeditions, and they scanned and transcribed all of them. And so that's why we have them available today. And that is essentially it, very quick.
Now Ethan can talk a bit more about all of this.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me here today. I can't tell you how important these types of studies are to the Bahamas National Trust. We don't have a lot of archived information about plants and plant communities and the way things like the vegetation actually looked in our collections. So to be able to have this kind of deep look into what David Fairchild did and what he saw and what he was experiencing and interpreting, it helps us to try and patch together an understanding of what the Bahamas looked like now 90 plus years ago. And we certainly hope that these types of studies continue to happen so that we can gain even more access to this information.
Okay, Ethan?
Yes.
I would like to mention something else, to mention that as a follow-up, once we found these photos of the palm, Cocotrinas inawensis in Inagua, then the aftermath was that the Bahama National Trust and the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, they made a joint expedition to go and target this palm, particularly in Inagua and Little Inagua. That was funded by external funds. And Ethan, we're still waiting for Brett to move and write the article about their findings in this expedition. So somehow this study ties all together concerning, we went to the archives, we found this, I think, I'm right, Ethan, that's the only palm endemic in the Bahamas, as far as I'm aware, no?
That is correct.
So we found these sort of archive documents. We had an undergraduate student that we could also mentor, also make her motivated beyond just, just being a doctor to put injections and study tumors. And also it was important, the thing about the cocotrinas. Indeed, we knew a bit about this very old photo from the expedition, but we never were able to find the travel log. It was because this expedition they made, Ethan and Brett, and again the Bahama National Trust and Fairchild to the Inaguas, though basically pushed me as a sort of the person doing the history to contact the U.S. National Archives, and wow, we found the travel log. I mean, I have to tell you, among all the expeditions made by the USDA, all basically looking for plants, that's the one that have the most complete and extensive travel log. And really is amazing. So with this, I'm open, we are open to any potential questions. We made this brief on purpose because we understood we have only 10 minutes and I didn't want to suck the time of the other basically speakers. Sorry for my accent from Cuba or from Miami, you know? If you go to Miami, you will be used to this kind of accent, you know? Any questions or we move on?
Yes, any questions for any of presenters? You can write in the chat or you can just, raise your hand, as Dr. Nair says.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, I have to congratulate the journal. It's nice to see this new issue of the journal again, that I've been following the journal for years. Nice to see all these contributors from outside, again, Bahamas, making the journal really international. That's the aim. And this question about other expeditions should be for Ethan, not for me. Ethan, we wish, no?
Yeah, I would like to address that. Actually, we've been doing a lot more expeditions lately with the development of the Leon Levy Native Plant Preserve on Eleuthera. It gave us opportunity to not just go and explore, but to actually collect material and bring it back to grow. So there was an initial expedition with Fairchild and FIU going back to 2012 to Andros. We did a trip to Great Inagua in 2016, and then we did a trip to do collections on San Salvador in 2017, in addition to a number of trips by collectors to Eleuthera. So hopefully, once we get to a post-COVID time, we can start looking to do other expeditions. A big one on our list is to try and get to Little Inagua. It's our largest and least known island in the archipelago.
I would like to mention as a follow-up and something I forgot to mention. I also have a grad student, her name is Nicole Tiernan, doing her PhD on plumerias, these are the frangipines, very important ornamental plants in the tropics. And she had the money, the funding, everything ready to go with Ethan, maybe somebody from Fairchild, to do a survey of the plumeria species in the Bahamas. They are a bit of a mess. And this one species, very important one, that comes from the Bahamas. We were waiting for the permits, but also at the same time, we had the coronavirus, everything stopped. I don't know if the expedition will take place because Nicole plans to graduate this coming spring. So, but that's one thing we like to do it. It's very important to do this expedition in the Bahamas because this particular species is very important for the taxonomy of the whole genus. Plumeria obtusa is a real mystery, and it was collected in the Bahamas by Catesby, who was the first real person, the first person doing plant exploration in the Bahamas around the same time of Linnaeus. So that's all.
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Thank you. So yeah, Mr. Saunders isn't here, so let's move on to Dr. Perry. So Dr. Charmane Perry, Assistant Professor, African American Studies of the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Dr. Perry.
Hi. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here to share with you my article. I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen. But before I get started, I'd like to say hi to Mrs. Ballance. My research on Haitians in the Bahamas started like 10 years ago as a master's student, and she was extremely helpful in that initial research. So I just wanted to say hi because I spent a lot of time with her that summer. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see my PowerPoint. Okay, so the name of my article is called "You Can't Speak Creole in Here, English Only: Experiences of Stigma and Acts of Resistance Among Adults of Haitian Descent in the Bahamas." So basically, I'm just going to do a breakdown of my article, just go section by section and just pull out some highlights. So my research, this research is an extension of research conducted by William J. Felding, Virginia Ballance, Carol Scriven, Thaddeus McDonald, and Pandora Johnson. And it's based off their 2008 article, The Stigma of Being Haitian in the Bahamas, where they argued that Haitians are a highly stigmatized group and that there's a strong and pervasive stigma of being Haitian in the Bahamas. And so in their work, Felding and colleagues used secondary literature and media reports and data from the report of the 2000 Census of Population and Housing to situate their argument on the stigma of being Haitian in the Bahamas. And so in my article, I'm building upon that research and supporting their research by using examples from interviews conducted with adults of Haitian descent in the Bahamas, which reinforce their arguments concerning stigma. And so in particular, in this article, I explore examples of stigma in the public hospital, speaking Creole, and the fear of being stopped by immigration officers. And then in the last section of the paper, I also discuss the ways people of Haitian descent display acts of resistance in the face of stigma. And so this is important because it demonstrates the way people of Haitian descent persevere in the Bahamas. And so then I think one important contribution of this article to this area of stigma is that Felding and colleagues' research focuses primarily on Haitian nationals, but my research, my interviewees, my participants are second generation Haitians born and raised in the Bahamas. And so this idea of stigma extends to those born there. And even those who have citizenship experience stigma. So this idea of stigma and the stigma of being Haitian encompasses the entire Haitian. And so just some about my research context. So this research comes out of my dissertation research. And it's a small population, but I interviewed 28 adults of Haitian descent born and raised in the Bahamas. 15 were women and 13 were men. And so I conducted this research in Nassau. So all of my participants were currently living in Nassau at the time. And so my research questions for my dissertation revolved around what does it mean to be a person of Haitian descent, born and or raised in the Bahamas, and how do persons of Haitian descent define themselves and construct their identities in the Bahamas. And so there are different themes that emerge, and one of the themes that emerged from this research is this idea of stigma. And so from this, from my 28 participants, about 20 identify ways that they experience stigma in the Bahamas. And so now we'll just go into some of the body of my paper. So use of public hospitals. So Haitian nationals represent the largest undocumented community in the Bahamas. And because of their status and relatively low level of education in Haiti, the Haitian community in the Bahamas often disproportionately live in poverty, as they are primarily employed in low and semi-skilled agricultural and domestic occupation. Because of the high levels of poverty in the Haitian community, it means that they are more likely to use government hospitals than private hospitals. And so poverty in the Haitian community within the Bahamas operates as a form of stigma, as the levels of poverty and underemployment or unemployment are labeled as distinct differences between Bahamians and Haitians. But the stigma experienced by Haitians at the public hospital also connect to these ideas that Haitians are taking over the Bahamas and are a threat to the national and cultural sovereignty of the Bahamas. And so just to share a quote from one of my participants about this idea that they're taking over or they're flooding the Bahamas, she said, in particular in terms of public hospitals, she said, quote, and then sometimes they don't just look at you, they look at you and they would say negative things. They would say, these Haitians filling up the hospitals and all sorts of stuff or whatever, end quote. And so what's important about this section are the ways in which participants felt that they were identified as Haitian, and it was usually as a result of their surname. It was also because of Creole, but it was also because of their surname. And so surnames, this is important because surnames function as a cue for one's ethnicity or their assumed ethnicity, and then is used as a way to label and discriminate against a group of people. And so then, like surnames, Creole functions as a marker of stigma because it represents a linguistic and cultural difference between Haitians and Bahamians. And so for my participants, verbal assaults, they experience verbal assaults by many Bahamians in public spaces. And it appeared most frequently when they were speaking Creole in public. Participants expressed that Bahamians would tell Haitians that they couldn't speak Creole, even if they weren't in conversation with them, right? So if they're just having a conversation with another person who speaks Creole, they would get these kind of encounters. So I have a few quotes from my interviews. So one participant, she was telling a story that she witnessed at the Department of Immigration, where two women were speaking Creole to each other. And she said that, quote, the immigration officer came over and was like, oh, you can't speak Creole in here, English only, end quote. And then another participant said that many Bahamians would get upset when Haitians speak Creole. And he said, quote, they get mad and then they spin around and they be like, excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, it's very rude that you're speaking this language around me and I do not understand, end quote. And then he went on to even say that he's been told, quote, why are you effing speaking this language around here? End quote. And so I think what's really interesting about this particular participant's his narrative is that this wasn't just from people that he didn't know. He would get this kind of interaction from Bahamians that he did know, that he had a relationship with. And so then the last section in terms of this stigma is a fear of immigration officers. And so participants in my research experience stigma due to perceptions of presumed illegality. And so this would manifest in a variety of ways in the interviews, but for this particular paper, I focused on the experiences with the Bahamian immigration officers and police officers. And so there were 5 interviewees, all men who spoke about interaction with immigration officers and the belief that they were stopped because they were Haitian, the assumption that they were Haitian. And so I have a quote from one of my participants, and he said, and there's a point in time when they actually stopped me on the bus and they asked for ID, and I gave them a false name because I have a funny last name. And I know if I say it, they would carry me, and they start asking everybody's name and everybody's ID. They stopped me. I said, I don't have an ID on me. So they said, get off the bus, me and 2 other folks. So they was like, what's your name? And I was like, I held it. I started to stutter. I just gave them a false name. I said, Antoine Johnson. They say, do you have an ID? I was like, no, I don't have an ID. They went to check my name in the system, and come to find out it was a good thing that the name I gave them was a clean name. So I was good, I was straight, and they just left me, end quote. And so I think there are a number of things that we can pull out from this quote in terms of just stigma and sense of belonging in the Bahamas, but in particular, it demonstrates the level of fear and anxiety that, that people of Haitian descent experience just walking, right? Just doing normal everyday activities in the Bahamas. And this sense of fear is heightened in periods of immigration raids, where they feel even more afraid. And these are people who are born and raised in the Bahamas, but because they're still in the process of getting citizenship, they feel vulnerable to these immigration raids. And then finally, in the last part of my paper, I talk about acts of resistance. And so it's important to acknowledge that although the Haitian community faces discrimination, there's a great amount of courage and agency displayed by people of Haitian descent born and raised in the Bahamas. So there were different ways that this came out, but one way was that they would express that they were proud to be Haitian. And so this wasn't something that I asked, this was just something that would come out and when they would like talk about their identity or their experiences in school, particularly in school, they talked about growing up being teased about being Haitian, right? So then over the course of their childhood, they would develop, they would go from, sometimes, not all of them, go from being ashamed of being Haitian to having a sense of pride in being Haitian. So that just developed as they matured and got older. Another thing that they would talk about was celebrating Haitian Flag Day. And so I think that this is important because with Haitian Flag Day, it's a public display of being proud of being Haitian, right? So there are outside festivities where there's compa and there's Haitian food, right? They're wearing red and blue that symbolizes Haitian colors, right? So there's this public act of resistance when they're celebrating Haitian Flag Day. And then also it's connecting them to the Haitian diaspora, right? Because Haitian Flag Day is celebrated throughout the diaspora. And then the last part is speaking Creole in public spaces. And so I think just based on what the participants have said in terms of the verbal assaults that they have encountered in terms of speaking Creole in public spaces, we can argue that when they do speak Creole and they're not afraid to speak Creole and they don't care, right, that this functions as an act of resistance, right? This is a pushback to those who feel like they shouldn't speak Creole, that they should speak English, right, in public, right? So when they do that, that definitely functions as an act of resistance. And so then just to wrap it up, just very briefly, I think one of the things that this research seems to demonstrate, I think even in terms of Fielding and colleagues, their research in terms of the Haitian community, or Haitian nationals, one is just the failure to integrate Haitian nationals into Bahamian society, but then we also see this replicated in their children who are born and raised in the Bahamas, that there's still this failure to fully integrate them into the Bahamas because they're still seen, because of their Haitian ethnicity, they experience this stigma, right, that makes them feel like the other or that they're foreign in their country of birth. And from my interviews, they want to be included in the Bahamas. They want to contribute to the Bahamas, right? Most of them don't have plans to live anywhere else but in the Bahamas, right? They don't plan to go to Haiti, or they don't plan to go to the United States. If they're planning to go to the United States, maybe it's to further their education, but they plan to come back to the Bahamas once they're done, right? And so I think that their experiences just demonstrate the way that they're not fully being integrated into the Bahamas.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Feel free to write in the chat or put up your hand, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, this is obviously a very valuable and interesting line of research. We thank you very much for publishing your work in our journal. We need more of this kind of research for sure in the Bahamas. Okay, great. Dr. Virginia has a question. Are you pursuing more research on the Haitian population in the Bahamas?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
Virginia's asking a question.
Oh, okay. Are you pursuing more research on the Haitian population in the Bahamas? So right now I'm working on finishing up, just publishing some information from my dissertation. And now I'm just, I am still interested in continuing this work on Haitians in the Bahamas, but I'm also interested in maybe looking at Bahamians as well. I feel like that would give more of a complete understanding of what's happening in the Bahamas. So understand how are they understanding Haitian immigration, and how are they understanding the second generations Haitians claims to citizenship. So I think I'm increasingly interested in that perspective, looking at Bahamian's perspective. And I think that will give my research more of a holistic approach to what's happening there. But I'm still interested in the Haitian population. I'm not abandoning that once this is done. I think it'll just continue to grow. What inspired me, any plans to interview Bahamians about, okay, I think I just answered that. Yes, so that's the next word. Yes, I definitely want to interview Bahamians about their views about Haitians. Because what I get is generally from newspaper articles. And I have read a few other articles in terms of like perceptions of Creole and different things like that. So I definitely want to interview Bahamians as well. And what inspired me to study this topic? So this is a long story, but my father is Haitian. And so in grad school for my master's program, we had to do an external research project for our thesis. And I knew that I wanted my work to be on Haiti, and I knew I wanted it to be outside of the United States. And I don't speak Creole fluently, and I don't speak French. And while doing some research, I stumbled upon an article about a young man of Haitian descent, born and raised in the Bahamas. It was something called like something about how he was stuck, and it was rooted in his citizenship, like not having citizenship and not belonging in the Bahamas, and really not knowing what he was going to do with his life, whether he should just try to migrate to the United States because of his lack of citizenship. And so then it just spiraled from there, and I reached out to Ms. Ballance, and it just spiraled from there. I came down there, and the work just grew from there. Have you ever wanted to look at other nationals and why they are not discriminated against as much? Or is it just due to population size? That's actually a really good question, and I'm going to write that down. I've never looked at I've never really thought to look at other nationals, so other migrants or other ethnic groups in the Bahamas and why they're not experiencing as much. I think I just took for, maybe just took for granted that it's due to population size that Haitians are experiencing. I think I just took it that Haitian, because of their population size, right? Well, one, because of their population size, that this is the reason why questions around immigration are focused on Haitians, even though there are other undocumented migrants in the Bahamas. So I think it just stopped there. But then I think also too, there's this larger diasporic stigma of being Haitian that I think just carries no matter where Haitian people are, they experience similar types of stigma, whether that's in the Dominican Republic, whether that's in the United States, right? It just seems that no matter where Haitians go, they face these similar struggles, right? And so I think I've become interested in that, but I do think that that is a good question to try to understand why Haitians and why not other nationals are targeted in terms of anti-immigration and xenophobic stances by Bahamians. So thank you, Drew, for that question. Thank you for all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the illustrious Miss Virginia Ballance, Nursing and Health Sciences Librarian of the University of the Bahamas. Her article is with Mr. Fielding.
Mr. Fielding and I, yes, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and proceed. Stop video, share screen, here we are. Mr. Fielding and I have put together a literature review on the topic of corporal punishment in the Bahamas, particularly in the schools. How it all started, because it's always interesting to know that in, I think it was July or August 2019, the president of the University of the Bahamas, President Smith, was asked to convene a committee to inform the Minister of Education about the continued use of corporal punishment in Bahamian schools. And the committee was to consider the legal, medical, psychological, sociological, cultural, religious, and historical aspects of the topic. So a committee was convened of local experts representing each of these aspects of the topic. And William Fielding and I were pulled in as resource people to provide research assistance and write briefs on the topics. So we had gathered quite a lot of information from local Bahamian sources, Caribbean sources, international sources, including books, articles, reports, theses, and so on. And then there was lots of information coming from interest groups, NGOs, international agencies, and so on. So the report was submitted to the minister. And then we had Hurricane Dorian. But the literature review in itself was so interesting that we thought we would write it up and analyze it. And it turns out to have, there he is, 5 major themes or strands. And so I'm going to just address each strand rather quickly and talk about what we found. Historically, corporal punishment seems to be ingrained in the psyche because it was used to punish convicts and criminals. And from the Prisoners Project, we had a very good, thorough article to draw on written by 2 of our University of Bahamas professors, Christopher Curry and Ann Yolenton, and where they reviewed the use of flogging of prisoners through the ages from about 1850 onwards. And also there was a paper by Lofquist, which was published in the IJBS in 2010 about executions. So what we drew out of that was that the severe punishment was levied on criminals and prisoners, but no aspect of rehabilitation. And interestingly enough, flogging of prisoners is still on the books in the Bahamas. Corporal punishment is largely used to train children. There was a study by Otterbein and Otterbein in Andros from 1973. It's clearly a cultural norm as discovered by Sutton and Alvarez also in 2016. And in some cases, from studies we did locally at the university, Shane Brennan and Marie Carroll, that corporal punishment is almost bordering on, bordering on child abuse. And these negative parenting links to criminality. And as well, a persistent attitude is that corporal punishment is sanctioned by the Bible. Spare the rod and spoil the child, which is not in the Bible, by the way. And so we turned out that we determined that corporal punishment of children is deeply ingrained in the psyche, and it does lead to, although people say it was used on me and I turned out okay, there are long-term consequences. A great resource that we used to find out about the use of corporal punishment in the schools were the long studies that the School of Education students used to have to write. And these are in the special collections department of the university library. And they really are a fantastic resource that is maybe underestimated, but they were typically written in the 70s and 80s. And there are lots of them on many different topics. So the ones we found that about corporal punishment, we determined that they found that it was used as a classroom management tool and convenient, and it was totally acceptable. But there was never any kind of understanding whether having fear in a learning environment inhibits the student's ability to learn. And that just seemed to be corporal punishment was at home and at school. There were quite a few of these student studies by Moxie, Barnett, Smith, and so on. And they all pointed to the fact that there were no guidelines and that it was just accepted as a way of classroom management. In the regulation of corporal punishment, it turns out no guidelines, but the Ministry of Education had to put some together in about the year 2000. And these have gone through several editions, 2001, 2009, and I forget, I can't see the last one here, 2014. The Safe Schools Protocol was assessed by Pandora Johnson in our Violence in the Bahamas book, Violence in Schools. A lot of the studies showed that teachers didn't have to use corporal punishment. In fact, one study showed that only about 30% of the teachers thought corporal punishment could actually help them with classroom management. They like to carry the stick, but they don't want, some don't want to use it. And then as a result, in the Bahamas, there are actually 2 tracks of schools where corporal punishment is used or alternate methods are used for classroom management and discipline. And it shows that schools where it isn't used actually have better results. For long-term consequences of corporal punishment, there is definitely an association between this experience of violence at the school and in the home in terms of corporal punishment and a crime. So there are very deep concerns about the long-term consequences. It creates more anger, where what was spanking turns out to be terrible abuse. And a deeper consequence is that a society that has a lot of violence or corporal punishment, it inhibits the creativity and innovation of thinking in the society. In the paper, there's a graph which shows a scatter graph of levels of violence in society and the levels of creativity and innovation. It's interesting that Bahamian findings actually mirror the international literature, particularly in the long-term aspects. And we also looked at this role of social media. And in 2019, there were a lot of instances in not only the mainstream media, but also like the print and newspaper, television, but also of late more in the social media of videos and reports of violence in the school, which are then distributed through Facebook, WhatsApp, email, whatever. And that just further exacerbates the problem of humiliating the person who's being beaten. Overall, the research shows that there are many long-term consequences of corporal punishment that outweigh the short-term change in behavior. And up to this paper, the only paper that looked at that would have been the thesis by Knowles in 1999. Corporal punishment leads to unacceptable levels of violence in society. So we did finish our paper. The paper was submitted to the Ministry of Education, but he left it for society to have more debate about it and more discussion. And that's where it stands. But at least we have gathered all this literature together and analyzed it and make it available through publication. So thank you. Okay, Raymond, stop share. Where am I? Back to you, Raymond.
Yes, sorry. Any specific questions for Ms. Ballance and or Mr. Fielding?
Oh, shit.
The question from Nico Scavella, I take it you're from the media, yes? You're looking for a succinct wrap-up?
For each presenter? Oh.
But before we move on, let's questions for Ms. Ballance and Mr. Fielding.
Well, maybe Mr. Fielding's better to address the whoever spares the rod hates their children. What is the rod? Mr. Fielding, you answer that.
All right. Thank you. Yes, there's a misquotation from the Bible that is frequently used. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child. There's, of course, we must remember that the Bible is a theological treatise. It's if you like, it's addressed as to how we should live in right behavior with the Lord. And of course, in the days when that particular proverb was written, the rod could equally have been the scroll on which the Torah, or the law, the Jewish law, was written. And so one perfectly good reading of that instruction is that if you do not instruct your child in the way of the Lord, then the child is going to run into difficulty. So to simply think of a rod as being something with which we might beat somebody, that can be perfectly interpreted in an alternative format. It would be, if you like, ambiguous. It certainly is ambiguous. And so the actual quotation that people use, he spares the rod, spoils the child, comes in fact from a rather bawdy poem. So I think that if the people who quoted that as being a saying from the Bible would be rather distressed if they realized its correct origin.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Fielding and Ms. Ballance? Okay, going. Anybody? Okay, so once again, I take it, Nico Scavella, you're from the media? And then you're looking for a wrap up? That's the point of these, your query? Okay, okay, yes, okay, University Relations, okay, great. Thank you. All right, so yes, presenters who are still here, could you each try to tackle our charge to please comment briefly on the significance of having contributed to the production of the collection and what the International Journal of Bahamian Studies means to the advancement of quality research, not just in the Bahamas, but internationally as well.
Can I go first then?
Go for it, please. Ms.
Okay. I'll comment generally about the 3 literature reviews that are published in this volume. There's the one on corporal punishment, which is a thorough analysis of what we know about the topic and its relation to criminality in the Bahamas. That addresses a big issue, 2 big issues. One, corporal punishment in the schools. Elsewhere in the world, it has been outlawed. Bahamas has signed many UN agreements and says it should also move to outlawing beating children in school, the teachers beating children, and this will move to the wider community as well. The second literature review compiles all the doctoral dissertations that have been written by Bahamians or about the Bahamas in the past few years. It covers 2012 to 2019. And it gives an interesting look at how the Bahamas continues to be a very fascinating place to study on many levels, whether that's botany, fisheries, sociology, history. It's just, and geology particularly. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic ground to study. And the third literature review is that on the legalization of marijuana in the Bahamas. And it explores, it gathers together all the literature that we could find on the social, religious, and economic, and also social justice aspects. And again, the Prime Minister had said it has to be discussed in widely in society. And I think they did put out a survey not so long ago, and maybe that's why more movement towards legalization of marijuana, creating a cannabis industry may go forward. So that's that. Thank you.
Okay, okay, so looks like there is a late question for you, Ms. Ballance and Mr. Fielding. Do you think there's any link between corporal punishment and the call for capital punishment?
Well, I think that if you view capital punishment as being the most severe form of corporal punishment, then I think the answer would be yes. And it goes to show that, as Virginia indicated, with the use of flogging in the prisons and so on, people's attitude towards deterring crime is always to increase the penalty. The attitude towards crime is not how do I take the criminal and rehabilitate the criminal. If you ask people what's the best way of reducing crime, they will say to increase the punishment. So I think that it's part of this continuum that we believe that if we keep on upping the punishments, then we will be successful in changing people's behavior, rather than trying to see how we can rehabilitate people and change their behavior so that they can become a more productive member of society. I hope that answers that question.
Okay. So Dr. Perry and Ms. Chavarria, would you like to take a stab at the question? Please comment briefly on the significance of having contributed to the collection and what being part of what IJBS means to the advancement of quality academic research in the Bahamas and internationally.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, what we've seen today is just the richness and diversity of research on the Bahamas, which I think was a reflection of the country and the people itself. So I know for me personally, I've only been there twice in about 2 months each time, but like my work on, even though I'm not a native of the Bahamas, my work is important to me because in that time I definitely grew to love the Bahamas. And so it's like, if I could live somewhere else outside of the United States, that's one of the places I think I would live. So to me, it's more than just publishing research. It's about being a part of this community in this space that I've grown to appreciate. And then I also think in terms of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies, that it's it being an open access journal, and just the politics around that, in terms of knowledge production and people not being able to have access to reading about reading scholarship about certain spaces because they're not a part of an institution or they can't afford a journal subscription to read, right? So what is the meaning of knowledge? Like, who are we producing knowledge for if there's a charge to it, if it isn't accessible to everyone? So I think the fact that this read accessible to people makes it so much more extremely important, and makes the journal that much more important, because a lot of journals aren't like that. You have to pay, right, if you want your work to be open access. And then some of that is just about exposure, not really people just having access, you know, being able to read more broadly about people and places.
Okay, great. Chavarria, would you like to add to that?
Really, I don't think I could have said it any better. Personally, though, just to answer the portion about this personal significance of having contributed to the journal, Dr. Ortega already mentioned that I'm an undergraduate student, so this is like an immense honor for me to even have been a participant, let alone it being accepted into the journal. It's a particular passion project for me, just because I think maybe we overlook plants a little bit, because the way that the local flora and fauna of any location ends up influencing the culture of the people, and just the dynamics of how the community ends up growing, and just as the societal implications of something as simple as the type of plants and the food that you can get from it. So I think it was particularly interesting to go sort of backwards in time and look, like Ethan Freid said, 90 years backwards at what was happening when these explorers went to these different islands and saw the people there, the plants, and then to be able to bring this to the current time and being able to extrapolate some information from that, and be able to, even like Dr. Ortega said, be able to perhaps define a new taxonomy for one plant and just be able to get a better understanding, even now in the present, from something that was far, far, far long away from our time. And the second portion was what IJBS means to advancement of quality academic research. Yes, I really don't think I could say it much better than Dr. Perry. Just the open access knowledge of this to anyone who would be able or interested in being able to access it. I think the fact that it's also accepting international articles from different locations is also amazing, because I think where it's not a limitation so much as there's a certain perspective that you have as a native, as being entrenched in the community. And it's always interesting to see what someone coming outside of that can be able to notice and perhaps just draw attention to it. So it's something that we can celebrate or even work on more. So I'm really happy to have been here, and I'm glad that we were all able to share this these article topics, especially at a time like this. So thank you so much.
Okay, great. And Mr. Fielding, your take on this. Mr. Fielding. Is he still here? We might have lost him.
No, I think he's not here.
Okay, right. So there's a lot of, although we definitely don't have as much research about the Bahamas as there are other Caribbean countries such as Jamaica, in large part because they have had research universities for decades and a larger population. If you Google Scholar search the Bahamas, there's actually, particularly in like the physical sciences, there's quite a bit of research that actually goes on about the Bahamas, but our local research institutions haven't traditionally been involved with that research. Yeah, so hopefully IJBS, one of its many functions is as a way to build connections between the Bahamian research community based out of UB and the broader community and international scholars who study the Bahamas. Yes, hopefully, as right now it's anything that's, you can publish an article in the IJBS on any academic subject as long as it's relevant to the Bahamas. Ideally, yes, it would be, we could be able to narrow it down into and have different journals that focus on, one that focuses more on natural science issues, one that focuses more on social science issues, one that focuses more on humanities issues. We aren't there yet, but maybe in 5-10 years we'll be there. in a large part, that's just because we haven't had the volume of articles to support all those different journals. But you know, we had the most issues. We had the most articles, I believe, we've ever had in this issue. So we're moving in the right direction. That's my take on it. Okay. Any other questions? Any other comments before we wrap up? Okay, well, gone. Okay, thank you everyone for participating, taking time on your Friday afternoon to present. Yes, thank you very much to everyone, and Dr. Nair and Dr. Oriaki and all of the presenters. And yes, Dr. Nair, anything else?
Thank you once again for all the participants for taking your afternoon to be here today for this session. Just a note on our next Research Edge session, which will be on the 20th of November. We have two presentations. The first one is on the impact of COVID-19 stress on the Bahamian population. And the second one is on the potential of using a scanning electron microscopy to advance research in the Bahamas. So that will be held on the 20th November. And on 4th December, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the inception of Research Edge. So those of you who's interested to come in, especially those who are not from the university, you are an external collaborator who wants to be part of the listing of the call for all our Research Edge session, please do not hesitate to email research@ub.edu.bs. Okay, so I will put that in the chat. So if you want to get, if you want to continuously be invited for this session, please do not hesitate to contact us. We do have your email because you have registered. But at the same time, we don't want to spam your email with continuous notice from us unless you want to get the notice from us. So if you're keen to come for any of our session, please do not hesitate to contact us. So thank you once again. As I've put in the chat as well, UB is currently working on to launch our first MRES program, Masters in Research and PhD program, hopefully to be launched. It is going through the Senate approval now. So we are very hopeful to be launching this in spring 2021. And we are expecting to see more research coming out in this region from this program. So I think it is good to see the changes that has taken place, the trend that has taken place in IGBS and the increase in the number of research in this field, in this area. So this is a good sign. And I think it's a good time for us to even launch this program. So once again, thank you to everyone. Stay safe. And we hope to see you again in our next session. Thank you, Raymond, for the session today.
Thank you, Dr. Nair.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.